Om Nicho Nichanam Chetanas Chetananam Eko Bahunam Yo Vidadati Kamam Tamatmastam Yenu Pashanti Diraha Tesham Shanti Ashvati Netaresham Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. That one, the eternal among non-eternal things, the intelligence of the most intelligent ones, who, though ever one, nevertheless fulfills the desires of the many. That one, the illumined souls realize, is dwelling in their own hearts. To them belong peace, and to none else. May that Brahman protect us, may Brahman sustain us, and may Brahman illumine our thinking process. May we not find fault with each other, with the world, or with the teachings. And may what we study be a source of inspiration to us eternally. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om Tat Sat. Namaste to all of you. Aloha from us here in Hawaii, and we're looking at people from around the globe, checking in on Saturday for Satsang as we look into the teachings of non-duality, qualified non-duality, and duality too. And we also must look at some teachings that are rather suspect in this day and age, which dip down into less desirable ways of thinking, the narrow fundamentalism and so forth, because Vedanta has a very universal appeal and it has a very universal perspective and outlook. And we're very fortunate to be in possession of such things like the great teachings in the Bhagavad Gita and the 108 Upanishads in Portland in a couple weekends now. We'll be looking on and studying the Darshan Upanishad, Yabala Darshan Upanishad to make it complete. And so we haven't looked at that minor Upanishad ever. So we'll be taking a deep look at that, in which Dattatreya, some of you may have heard that very venerable name, teaches his student Samkriti, whom you've also heard of from other Upanishads. Who's a great being who went around taking teachings from all different sources, the rishis, like our own founder, Lex Hixon, did in many different religious traditions, would like to go to different songs and various meetings of spiritual beings and drink in the nectar of teachings from these different religious perspectives, all the different religious traditions of the world, which he called himself a citizen of all of them. Like to pay deference to all the great teachers and drink in that nectar of non-dual truth, as we like to call it in Vedanta. So whereas in our order, more leaning towards Divine Mother and Ramakrishna and Sharda and Vivekananda, we like to look at non-duality as the main pillar upon which everything stands. Or, as I was looking into the beautiful words in Sanskrit yesterday, the Sutradhara, the holder of the string or the fiber that runs through all teachings and through all religious traditions of the world. So we look upon that as Divine Mother, also as the Hiranyagarbha, they call the Sutradhara. That is the universal mind, the mind of the great Trinity, or Mahat, sometimes they call it. And thereby keep a record, which is ancient or more likely timeless, of these teachings. And amazing how they've remained in their pristine state over the march of millennia, and even over yugas, as we were looking at in a seminar a few weeks ago. So we pay attention to this unchanging while we try and navigate the changing. So one is called nirguna, free of attributes or beyond attributes, and the other is called saguna, attended by them. But then there's also this facade of Maya, which seems to try and collect around the human soul whenever it decides to take on a body. The embodied condition, we call that, or samsara, another great Sanskrit word for it. Cycles of birth and death without knowing about any of these great teachings. We must probably try to put ourselves in position, just like if you were to go teach grade schoolers, you'd probably want to try and put yourself in the way the mindset of those youngsters and take on what they're thinking and understand better. I think that's what Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa did for the whole world when he came down out of non-dual samadhi and then began to look into the different religious traditions of the world and also take on the different philosophical perspectives of people. Everything from cults and sampradayas and darshanas and different traditions of India, which they have many, to the whole world's various looks at divine reality, and therefore put himself in our shoes. So we need to do that too in terms of people who are suffering. And so there's that element of compassion in India's darshanas that you see so well marked by the appearance of Lord Buddha and Sri Krishna and others. And they tend to approach it and disintegrate it or dissolve it away. And one of the great ways in which they do that is this Jnana Yoga, one of the four great yogas of the world. Can put Jnana Yoga, this wisdom of Divine Mother, together with bhakti, the love that you feel for reality, for both the changing and the unchanging forms of Brahman. And then combine with that Raja Yoga as well, then go about doing all your work as worship, as Vivekananda said nicely about Karma Yoga. Then you have these four great yogas that have been there since, well, you've probably read about it in the Bhagavad Gita when Krishna calls it Chatur, which is four, Chatur Dasya Yoga. And then you have what Vivekananda called the religion of this age. My new discovery, he said, and he had two discoveries that he mentioned in letters. One of them was his discovery about the three plateaus of philosophy, Advaita, Vishishtadvaita, and Dvaita. And he put all the religions of the world into those three categories, how they believed, if they were dualists, if they were qualified non-dualists, and so forth. His other great discovery, he said, was that the new religion of this age is the four yogas. So he was giving us simultaneously universal looks that Vedanta is so famous for giving, that basically allow people to operate within the religion in which they were born and which they chose before they embodied, and do it without too much emphasis on denominations that tend to separate people into different countries and different races, and thus separation going on. And we know that that's the work of the mind in Maya, is to put up these barriers, or compartmentalization is a nice word for it, or delimitation is another good word. Is that the intellect and the ego get together and want to limit everything down to just a very narrow space inside of itself. That's called the intellectual sheath, the Manomaya Kosha and the Jnanamaya Kosha, take this universal wisdom and limit it down into small little areas, and then call it one's own. The ego gets in there and begins to call it, and proceed by the mantra, I, me, mine, instead of thou, thee, and thine, as Ramakrishna said. So all of these teachings can be looked at from the standpoint of these three philosophical states of mind, which everyone has a right to and everyone's operating at. And then the four yogas, which open up the field of practice for everyone, is that one can focus on one, and probably one is better at one than the other three, just as a natural consequence of rebirth and karma. But it doesn't mean that then you can't more readily expand into a comprehensive understanding of what the word yoga means in a more universal way. I mean, not just that it's not physical and all of that, which we know, but also that it can apply to all the religions, every practitioner of every religion in the world. When you say the word yoga, then you're talking about union. It's a very simple word, and it's actually a proclamation of what already is, that you're already one with the divine. And then you just have to determine from that point, how far have I fallen away from that realization that I'm one with the Lord? And then begin to do away with that delimitation of the mind, intellect, and ego, and your thoughts. So you can, again, get closer and closer by your own practice to that truth of indeterminable oneness that Brahman is. And you might have to know not only the words of your own tradition, but you'll also want to know words like Allah and Brahman and Tathagata or Pragyaparam, what the different religious teachers called this divine reality, and how they brought it into the world by their own efforts and their own being. God walking around on two legs, as Vivekananda called people. So you might say that's kind of like in Christianity you get wings, but in Vedanta you get mankind walking around on two legs. You realize that you are that thou art. And then you exemplify that to others and they wake up, and then everyone's in the eternal state of yogic insomnia. So you have that ever awake state that your guru brings to you. A man has come to me from a land that never sleeps, one of the beautiful songs of India that my teacher used to recite, as he offered flowers on the altar to Divine Mother, to Sri Ramakrishna. A man has come to me from a land that never sleeps. Now all my dreams have become radiant meditations. But he would just forget us. We weren't even in the room. And he'd just be there in front of these images of Divine Mother offering these flowers on 90-year-old knees, bent down, and pronouncing these beautiful slokas of the Upanishads that were ever in his mind. He would never forget those. So that's a good way to go into old age and to leave the body with divine in your mind at all times. And the idea not only that God is, but that thou art that too. There's no difference between the Paramatman, the Supreme Self, and the Jivatman, the embodied self. And you just look at it as then God with attributes and God without attributes, depending on what level of mind, dualism, qualified, non-dualism, or non-dualism you happen to be at in that particular time or phase. And then you always have recourse to these four yogas. So that's a rundown that we can always contemplate every day of our lives when we get up. I have three phases of philosophy. I have four yogas to practice, and I have all the religious religious wisdom of the world and of all the traditions within me, and I am one with Brahman. So now, anyone have any questions? Or please share with us your week's studies.
This week, I was going through the first volume of Atmic Testament. That this is a book that's going to be coming out on the Raja Yoga lessons for those who aren't familiar with it. And Mahesh highlighted a particular section in it, and I was wondering if you would say something about it. You were talking about mantra in response to somebody's question, and there was a line in there where you said that mantra comes out of Om. It isn't created in the mind or formed in the mind. It comes from Om. And you were talking about the practice of mantra and its importance. But this statement that it's not formed in the mind, it's formed in Om, really stuck with me. And I was wondering if you could say something about it.
Just as we're not our body, we learned that, or some of us learn that. I think it's a, sort of Vedanta 101 or Yoga 101, but don't see many people acting on that lesson or learning that lesson. But nevertheless, in the same way that you're not the body, you're not the brain or the mind either. In fact, brain and mind get two different treatments in Vedanta. Anyway, the intellectual, pretty much believes in the mind and thoughts and conceptualization and imagination and so forth. And when the intellectual frame is reached somehow, either by the wonder of a scientist or philosopher, getting beyond or outside the delimitation of the intellectual sheath, and has a aha moment, usually has an epiphany, or whether the grace of the light of the divine penetrates from the inside out and penetrates into and breaks through the barrier of the ahamkara, the ego, the individual ego, and its vaunted possession of wisdom. When that takes place, then that word of all words, the word, possessed by the Vakdevi, the goddess of understanding and intelligence, dawns, and then these seed bijams and words for everything are found, contained inside of Om, and beings are then repeating it, and they found out that the wisdom that they had entertained in their minds under the auspice of the ego owning it was also an imitation. They also were repeating that. Words that they learned from the ground up, that is, from birth, through growth, and their parents taught them and school teachers taught them. Then all these words, they found out later that there was just kind of a repetition, as if every word had the right to be there, and was also had the right to be a mantra of a kind. It was all attended by intelligence. So that was, first and foremost, that was anterior to actually your birth and your mind growing and learning words. That the intelligence was already there, managing all of those outer phenomena that go on. So at a much higher level, when philosophical understanding dawns on a mature mind who has studied and meditated, again, put together the Jnanam and the Bhakti, hopefully, because the Bhakti probably won't occur in the Western scientist, or even quite often in the philosopher. Bhakti doesn't occur that much. But when those two are put together and you pierce through that cloud of nescience and the granthis, they describe it in different ways in the Yoga Darshanas. these knots in consciousness, you see through them and pierce through that, then it's just you get a sort of a precursor to what's always, that, as the tantras say, that Om was us always vibrating. It vibrates by its own power. It's the vibration of all vibrations, and that everything is within it, and all worlds are within it, and all beings, their minds, when they concentrate upon that all-containing word, then they'll find the mantras there, and they'll retrieve them, and they'll give them out to humanity. Great story about Chaitanya, when a lot of people know about this, and if you're more dualistic leaning, you probably don't like to hear this about Chaitanya, but he decided he was going to leave Navadvip and go to find a non-dual teacher, because he'd heard about non-duality. So he found his way to a teacher who gave him, taught him non-duality, also gave him a great mantra and told him, don't give this out to anyone. It's secret. So immediately he went out in the streets and started telling everyone that he'd got this beautiful mantra and he wanted to share with them. So broke that rule right away. And so of course, a great soul like him, he is Bhagavan, he's the Lord, Chaitanya. So a great soul like him would automatically want to retrieve that mantra from a great source and then pass it out to everyone for the relief of their suffering, and for the dissipation of the ignorance in their mind, and then for the bliss, the rasam, the outright bliss of coming close to the Lord by having in possession his or her most precious name. It's like you can't get close to anyone really until you know their name here, right? In the earth. I mean, you can rub shoulders with them, you can hobnob with them, you can do be in the same room with them, or be at the same gathering with them, whatever. But until they've introduced you and said, my name is, and you exchange names, then that closeness is just not possible. And you don't feel like you have a friend yet, or even a potential friend. But when those names get exchanged, you know you can call each other by the name, then that sense of familiarity comes dancing forward. And then from there, a relationship can develop. It's much the same way, but in an anterior way. I mean, this happened before you went to that gathering and met that person, that these names were dawned upon people even before the parents gave them names. That's why our names in the West are just silly, you know. It's get these silly names given to us, or some sort of, you know, English name that Tom, Dick, and Harry kind of thing. So, you know, but in other traditions, you're called Mahesh, you know, like you just said. Well, you know, you are the Lord. I'll just name you that, you know, I heard of a person recently named Valmiki, you know, so gee, Valmiki's in the room, you know. So where's Indra and the rest of the gods, you know? So, yeah, so names, I mean, we know that name and form, those are the first two aspects of Maya. But name and form are also, if Maya is placed aside and you're divinizing everything, or you're deifying everything from the outside in, because that's the way most people have to work. Yeah, slough off the mortal coil and go within, or meditate it away, or whatever you have to do. Then you'll find your way to this source, and this source is ultimately that. Since Brahman really cannot be a cause of anything because it's causeless, then you have to have a medium, and that's the word. So you'll find yourself to the word. When Sri Ramakrishna said, when I first encountered the word within myself, I saw that all the worlds were coming out of it and dissolving back into it, and no time was passing. So he got to a timeless place where he could see the matrix, the generator of all things, the most inward point where the primal vibration, the unstruck sound, and he became the unseen seer of it. You see, and how do you take language and try and explain this, which is a completely non-dual experience you're having, which is the only way you will get beyond and pierce through the intellectual frame of reference that Western science is caught in, and also Western psychology, and might as well call it Western philosophy too, in order to get through that I-ness and my-ness of owning these things, which is an actual barrier you're placing between you and the source, which we would call mother. Then you're going to have to penetrate like that. And the Om is going to be one of the most important and powerful and most effective of all methods, if you want to call it that, or principles. It's the Mahatattva. It's the greatest of all principles. And so that's why then you heard when I commented on, or when, if it was Patanjali's slokas I was commenting, or sutras I was commenting on, that you find out that the word, vibrates itself. It's like the sun has self-effulgence, doesn't need any other light. The moon needs the sun to borrow light. In the same way with sound, everything else borrows it from Om. And the quicker that you connect all words into the mind, and the mind into the intellect, and the intellect into the individual self called ego, and that into the witness, and the witness into Atman, then you'll find Brahman. And this is all by way of involution that this happens. And there are different darshanas that teach steps of that involution, but I've shared with you in SRV before. And we probably know that Jesus came away from the Far East and back to the Middle East and said, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. I just remembered this beautiful piece of teaching that's been on the minds of the ancient rishis of India forever. Is this, unfortunately, it didn't get very well expanded. I mean, the Word was the flesh, and he was that, and all that. It goes more towards a personal God, which is okay to a point. But if you accept the words verbatim, in the beginning was the Word, then you shouldn't interpret that to mean that there is a beginning, because there is no beginning. There just seems to be a beginning. You're beginningless, and the Word's in you. So that's how Sri Ramakrishna experienced it. When I came to the Word, meditating on the Word within myself. So Adihi sa samyoga metta hetu, that beautiful chant we call is that that Word is inside of you, and you're the Trikaladarshi, the witness of the three phases of time. And you've reached that, your consciousness has reached that plateau, and then it sees this matrix of everything, this pool of potential. And, at that time, who is breathing on it? Both the Bible and the Rig Veda are talking about breathing upon the waters. Well, those waters are Om, or Ekarnava. They're primal substance out of which everything springs. Just like you would make ornaments out of gold, or statues and figures out of clay. That primal substance is all held back there in the Word, and then things get formed out of it by a higher power, like a great mind, a cosmic mind. And then what spectrum are you falling into when you take it up? See, am I at the individual level? Am I at the collective level with my ancestors? Am I at the cosmic level with the gods? Or am I at the highest level with the Mahat, with the Hiranyagarbha, with the Trinity? And then then the mind is transported beyond that even. And then you get to where there's this so-called nothingness or shunyata, this absence of all things. And that's where names and forms begin to merge into the witness. But the Om is sounding eternally. So that this makes you aware that beginnings, middles, and ends are only happening in nature or in Maya. They don't happen like action. Vedanta doesn't believe in movement. So Brahman doesn't move. So they measure, Vedantas measure everything by those principles that they found to be true. Whatever is there in Brahman, non-creation, non-movement, and transcendence of name and form and time and space, those things are also me. I am Brahman. So you might say then the word is the last vestige of a fingernail hold upon anything with form that is there inside of you. Until then, Brahman is vibrationless because the word has vibration. That book you mentioned, Atmic Testimony on Yoga, is going to come out soon. So I'm entering the final proofs of it. And it's a 2-volume based on 10 years of study of yoga that I did with about 100 people, and who are mostly Westerners. So it's very unique in that way because we know, oh no, not another commentary on Patanjali's yoga. We know how many are there? Dozens in both East and West. But this has got a unique mark on it, is that it was conducted for 10 years amongst Westerners mainly, and they were asking questions on the Raja Yoga method. And this was a country that was, had been fooled by Hatha Yoga, and they'd be calling yoga physical and, referring to physical things when they said yoga, but yoga really means Raja Yoga or Bhakti Yoga or Karma Yoga or Jnana Yoga, the 4 great yogas. That's what yoga means. And so you don't want to relegate it to something that it's not. It's only just part of it. So that's the beauty of Raja Yoga, we call it Patanjali's yoga, 8-limbed, because yoga had some 6 phases it went through in as far back as we can remember. And so, the yoga we're talking about here is fairly contemporary when you talk about Patanjali. I mean, he must have lived 100 to 200 years after Jesus and 700 years after Buddha, because you could tell that he was influenced by Lord Buddha being in the world. So that Atmic Testimony on Yoga, we're finding out how apt a title or a subtitle that is, because when we, Annapurna's putting the cover up there, so one of our dear friends in India put together for us, and 2 volumes, and you can see by the cover the innuendo. There's Vedavyas there blessing you, and then there's Patanjali in the middle and Vivekananda on the right. So this is basically Vedanta, Patanjali Yoga, or Vedanta Yoga and Vedanta, or maybe call it Advaita in Swamiji's case. And so you can see their commentary by Vedavyas and Vivekananda. So we have a great 2 volumes of that ready to come out, and based upon these 10 or more years of study by Westerners. And they asked some really beautiful questions, and it went really deep. And then in the offing, almost without knowing it, I made my own Sanskrit English rendering of all the sutras. So that's in there too. And also interesting that, this has been taught by a Caucasian guru, if you will. And we've all participated in it through all that time and reached the conclusion of it. All these lessons before the book is coming out, of course, they're still being given out to people who write in for them. Some people I think there's 100 and some lessons. And some people are still at number 32, like I sent out the other day. A couple of people have finished the whole course and read the whole thing again, even though they participated in the original. And some people have still yet to discover that they can go back on that and make a huge study of it, a deep study of it. I would say that Tantra aside, because Tantra was never systematized by anyone, that of all the religions, but let's keep it in India, of all the darshanas of India that I've ever studied, Raja Yoga, Patanjali, also called Ashtanga, eight-limbed, is the most complex system of all of them. It's so deep and so vast. And of course, you're saying a lot when you say that, because there's Samkhya Yoga, which is 24 cosmic principles, and there's Vedanta with all its teachings. And so anyway, I found it to be, over those years of study, very deep and very broad, and as if it could go on forever, conveying to us these teachings. And here we have it here in the modern times too, even in our own vernacular, and with studied with people who are interested in our own race in this contemporary time. So, of course, there are many good versions we look to, and even Swamiji Vivekananda made a commentary on Raja Yoga when he was here, a very simple one, really, for beginners. Although, of course, it has, again, a kind of Vedic testament on yoga. It has the look of a Vedantist looking on the system. So in that cover she just showed you, you saw Vedavyasa and Patanjali on that cover. So Vedavyasa was one of those who was so impressed by Patanjali's readdressing of yoga that he wrote a commentary on it himself. So there's the father of Vedanta looking at the father of yoga system. So, that makes any person with philosophical interest sit up and go, really? I'd like to see that, and get very interested when you put two names like that together from two powerful systems like yoga and Vedanta. And when I was touring with Jayama Music before, and in the earlier decades of my life, basically I would come upon places that were even called Yoga Vedanta centers. People had picked up on the fact that these two darshanas of India were really not only prime as far as spirituality goes in the world, but they were perfect hybrid, sort of like Buddhism and Tibetan Buddhism. You get these perfect hybrids that come along. Sometimes hybrids don't work. You find they're just they're at odds and ends with each other. Some things, but in other ways, they just work perfectly as if they were meant to be together. Maybe even they are one, which is the view the Avatar has, of course, about world religions. That they're down there, either arguing about religions or they're trying to make religions behave with each other. Trying to get people to agree with one another, and he's laughing at both of those attempts, because they were one in the beginning and they'll be one always, and one in the end. And that's a very high and non-dual look, of course. You'd have to have that Sutradhara, knowledge of the Sutradhara, she who runs through everything, the meaning in words and the power in sentences and slokas and sutras. And if you've forgotten it, then in yoga, you'd go back and use Swadhyaya. In Vedanta, you'd use Shravana, Manana. In other words, you take these words and you'd look at them deeper. So I've found that though some people come and they think they've heard it all, you see, and oh, had that teaching, I've had that teaching, so I understand it. That's good. I found that beyond all that, and even engaging in repetition, that these words all of a sudden act as doorways. And I think that was one of the secrets of Sri Ramakrishna's samadhis, is that when you understand the power of in the words, and then when you hear them spoken, then they act as doorways or gateways into samadhi. So your mind is always transported by that same old teaching you once heard, even lifetimes ago. That's what brought you in this lifetime to be interested in Vedanta, was because some of those words had power on you in previous lifetimes. But contemplating them as Swadhyaya, and Manana and Shravana to hear them, and then Manana to think about them in your mind. Whole aeons could pass away, and you'd have this ability to connect straight to the mother of the word, who is beyond change, beyond time, beyond birth and death, beyond lifetimes, beyond philosophy. All the darshanas of India try and describe her, but she's the one that birthed them. She birthed all the darshanas herself. They're trying to describe her, and they're not having a very good time of it. She always escapes their detection and their description as the living essence in all those teachings and words. So you can approach her with words like mantras we were just talking about, are very powerful words. And slokas and sutras also are very powerful sets of words. So she gives them to you, you understand them, then you have to go back to her and present them back to her. Say, here's these words you gave me, I found out their true meaning. And by that you meet her. The soul meets its maker, makes it more than its equal. And I'm finding that the Kundalini yoga system is about that. The esoteric descriptions about how you move up the chakras, symbolized by the centers in the body, of course, but they're not really in the physical body. You move, consciousness awakens and moves with Kundalini. And we'll talk about this in a couple of weeks at the retreat at Windwood Waters. But as they move up the centers, they're looking for a certain nectar that they can collect of a kind of reddish brown hue, and that they get this nectar there from this living intelligence, from this living wisdom, and they collect it and they take it to her and they offer it to her, and that's liberation, that's freedom. So there's a whole train of teachings in Kundalini yoga that also follow this line of power in the word, or in words. And all of that, of course, drives the seeker on towards deeper depths and higher heights. Fairly soon, the barriers that people talk about are almost laughable. Say, well, why are you suffering? Say, why are you thinking yourself to be ignorant? Why are you pretending yourself to be bound? Strip away the mask, take off the coverings, emerge, awaken, claim your divine heritage, and then live in it. It's like the living in it. We saw that in Vivekananda, but he had attained it long ago. Sri Ramakrishna called him perfect soul, perfect man. Nitya Siddha is the word he used for Vivekananda. Nitya is eternal, Siddha is perfect. So eternally perfect soul. So when you're seeing Vivekananda in action in the body on earth for some 38 years that he lived, in full recognition and realization of the power of this. So, just pick up Jnana Yoga and read that. Because his Raja Yoga commentary was made easy for people. As I said, it's a very complex system, needs a lot of practice, but the Jnana Yoga is just like spoken truth. And I remember hearing bells when I read Jnana Yoga the first time. I'm not saying it was out in a steeple somewhere. I was in Europe and somebody was ringing and pulling a rope or something. And basically this was going off in the head. And again, Kundalini Yoga talks about those, and so do the Upanishads, talk about those sounds that you hear, tinkling of bells, sound of a flute, beating of a kettle drum. I mean, it's right there in the scriptures. And these are sounds all happening inside of you, a thundering sound, or the sweet sound that entices the soul to give up its attachment to things gross and start to yearn for and strive for things that are much more subtle. So we would like, and I think that's just the way our founder Lex Hixman was. He was always hurrying people through the door. Say, even people who didn't seem to be ready, because it's like you're going to fall back to sleep in Maya. But if you met Lex Hixon, he wouldn't let you. So you have a tendency to fall out. He'd be around in a few months or a year later. How far have you gone? And egging you on, urging you on to stay on the path and complete the mission that you came here for. There's no other reason to come into the body than realization of God. So he would be one to hurry people along. And that was because it was hurrying people out of ignorance and suffering. See, it wasn't because you could hurry people to the truth, because that's going to take some practice and some time you're going to have to spend. But you have to get away from this ogre that's behind you, that's going to swallow you back up if you just fall back to sleep. Once you've awakened and you're in the presence of a great teacher, then that's the hurry part of it. Then once you're on the path, slow down. You're already enlightened at that point. You don't know it yet. Your mind doesn't know it, but the mind will catch up to the spirit. Spirit is so fast. The mind will have to catch up to what happened to it after it got initiated, after it got mantra, the Gita, the Upanishads, after it visited Holy Company, like going to India, into a collection of illumined souls in a monastery. That's a powerful change you're talking about for the mind. So that'll be a matter of catching up, but at least the first goal, the penultimate goal is accomplished. You got out of the world. You dropped the world like a hot potato. That's something you'd like to do quick. Let's see. Hold on to a hot potato. Next time you pull one out of the oven without a tongue, you can remember my words. Take it up, put it on the counter real quick. You see, think, well, that's my exit from this world of ignorance. And you're not losing anything. You see, you're gaining it all back. You never can lose it. It's always within you. But if you've covered it up, then you make this quick exit from the world of Maya once you know that it's not real. And immediately you're in the real world of Brahman. The world of Maya and the world of Brahman look exactly the same. It's just a matter of the soul's comprehension of the distinction between the two. One is alluring and delimiting and imposing and attracting, and it's got suffering in it. See, Buddha's main teaching. So as soon as you see that, I'm dropping that like a hot potato, and I'm taking 100% to this world of Brahman. The world is now Brahman to me. It's not Maya anymore. And it's a practice you take up. Practice will turn into presence eventually. And then presence will turn into your perfection. Practice, presence, perfection. It'll just matter of course. Well, I'm only speaking at length, like as if this is a class and not a satsang, because you're so quiet today. It's just not a bad thing. Any final questions before we move on towards God blogs in an hour?
It seems to me that you're stressing the Om mantra, if I'm not correct. If that's correct, I don't know if that's right. If I'm interpreting it that correctly, you're saying the Om mantra. You're kind of proclaiming it as a sort of ultimate mantra in a way. But
definitely, I mean, it's both a bijam and a mantra by itself, and there's no other word in existence that can be a mantra by itself. Om can be that. So that's the word of Brahman, according to Sri Ramakrishna and Holy Mother. So that would be just meditating on that alone is going to have a huge benefit, even if you don't know the meaning of it, or if you don't understand it philosophically or intellectually yet. Anyway, I'm very happy to say that hear you say that what I'm saying is intellectually easy to understand. That's a new one. I like that. Beautiful. I hope everyone takes that perspective when they approach the Vedanta and yoga, and which can be, become very convoluted if it's not taught with perspective clarity.
I find it impressive now that everyone's saying the same thing, and that all the traditions are currently saying the same thing. It's coming down. There's slightly different words they're using, but the principle is. It was never laid down as carefully as this. I don't think even in the Buddhist scriptures it's laid down like this, or even in the Christian scriptures. But what's been said now is that the path has never been so clearly mapped, and the path forward.
Wonderful. Yeah, I think that was due to Vivekananda's. Before he left India, he was doing some very deep meditations on his master and on the mother, finding out that of all the darshanas or things he could have brought from India, which had a rich treasure house of religion and philosophy, like Jainism and Buddhism and so forth, finding out that the best thing to bring would be the Vedanta was a great foresight for him. And then while he was here, he did make comments on yoga. So that's that Yoga Vedanta combination. That both of those traditions talk about viveka khyati, the clarity of discrimination that you need to have in order to walk the spiritual path. And Buddhism also likes that word, khyati. You'll find that if you clarify the mind, that everything is just very straightforward. Let's take a break for an hour, come back with God blogs, and end with one of these beautiful chants. And Om Drishyam Pratitam Pravilapayan San Matram Anandaganam Vibhavayam Samahita San Bahir Antaram Va Kalam Niyetaha Sati Karma Bande Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. Brahman is an indeterminable mass of pure conscious awareness. Therefore, taking what is external and what is internal, merge them both into one indivisible state. Then meditate upon that state, pass your time contentedly, and be free. Om peace, peace, peace. Peace be unto us, peace be unto all. Om Hari Om Hari Om Hari Om Tat Sat.